Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Capandball here, your favorite gun channel in beautiful bright English language, and we are at the last chapter of the Mississippi Rifle series. And today I have two topics to cover. The first one will be about tactics. I'm going to tell about how these rifles were integrated into the tactical system and into the universal body of the US Army. And I'm going to tell about what kind of US Army existed before the American Civil War, because that's quite an interesting picture and there are a lot of differences compared to the European armies. And the second part of this chapter will deal about the accoutrements and all the accessories that were associated with the 1841 Mississippi rifle. I think this one will be interesting for you. Come with me. Let's talk first about the US Army of the 1830s, 1840s. We usually think that all the Americans are running around with rifles. Well, this is not true. This is not true. So even Washington's army during the Revolutionary Wars, well, it was mainly equipped with smoothbore muskets. And by the beginning of the American Civil War, this is still true. So most of the troops, large portion of the troops in the first years of the conflict are still armed with smoothbore muskets, percussion or flintlock. The US Army is quite different from the European armies. First of all, it is much smaller in the 1830s and 40s. In the 1830s and 40s, the total number of the soldiers is around 7,000 and few hundred maximum. But just before the American Civil War, it is still just 16,000. Just for a comparison, the key European powers, continental powers, had a peacetime army of 200,000–300,000 by this time. The task of the US Army completely differed from the European army's tasks. These European armies were built to fight the same kind of European continental enemies with same kind of 200,000–400,000 force, which means that they are preparing for large-scale continental wars. In the US, they are protected against these European armies because the oceans are very well protecting their borders. Of course, there are the southern border with the Mexicans, but their regular army is just as small as the US Army, so it is not really a big threat. But they are really protected because of their continental position. So these tasks were completely different. They were governing new territories, they were exploring new territories, they were taking part in engineering projects, they were defending actively the settlers. So this was a kind of different approach than what the European armies had to face. But let's talk about the riflemen of the US Army. So the riflemen were employed in the army from the very beginning. They were standing units, and there were temporary, say, irregular units as well. So the regular and the irregular component was present from the very beginning of the US Army. And this is very close to the small war concept of Europe. The small war concept, or small war phenomenon, was a really popular military art in the second half of the 18th century and in the first half of the 19th century. It is on the tactical level. It's a detachment war with a few thousand of soldiers consisting cavalry, artillery and infantry as well. And they are acting independently and very flexibly. It is completely different than, let's say, the large wars of the 18th century, which were quite controlled and quite inflexible. So the size of the US Army was quite small by these times. By the 30s and 40s, there were only 8 infantry regiments, there were only 4 artillery regiments and 2 dragoon regiments. Well, and their sizes, these regiment sizes, were also smaller than the European counterparts. In Europe, in a regiment, you have 3 or 4 battalions, let's say 3,000–4,000 people, which is quite a large force. Of course, the battalions of a regiment seldom fought together because the regiment was mainly an administrative unit and not a tactical unit. So the tactical unit was the battalion. In the US, the infantry regiment consisted of 1,000 men, so it was the same size as a European battalion, and it was an administrative and a tactical unit as well. By the middle of the 1840s, these units were undermanned and underfunded. So when in 1845, October, Zachary Taylor assembled his men to fight against the Mexican army, which operation started next year, well, he had 3,820 men only. This is half of the US standing army, and it's a large number in US scale, but compared to the European army, well, this is one regiment, or let's say this is a small brigade. So this is not such a significant force. In wartime, they assembled volunteer regiments, and this increased the number of soldiers that was available for the army. The war against Mexico contributed a lot to modernizing the army in the 1850s. Let's not forget that the decision makers and key officers of the American Civil War, well, most of them served in the Mexican War as junior officers, so they gathered their experiences there, including the experiences about the Mississippi rifle and using the rifle just as effective way as the muskets could be used. Please, if you like what I do, then please subscribe, like, share, comment, because this will help the channel grow. Because the search engines will not help us grow. You can also find us on History of Weapons and War platform, which is an excellent sanctuary for gun nuts like us, with thousands of videos about firearms history, all from educational channels. Let's talk about now how the rifle did fit into the body of the army. Well, in the 1830s and 40s, still vast majority of the US soldiers were armed with smoothbore flintlock muskets, not rifles. In the second chapter of this series, I promised you that I'm going to compare the effect of the rifle and the musket on longer ranges as well. Let's start it now. We are going to start from the bench. Now I'm going to use the same cartridges I used for the rate of fire tests and the accuracy tests, but now to 100 meters. And this is the 100-meter group of the musket, ladies and gentlemen, with the cartridges made according to the 1850 Ordnance Manual. And it's not tragically bad. It's, let's say, within the size of this black area. I have 1, 2, 3 shots here in a quite good group. This was my first shot here. I was aiming in the dead center of the target, but with this and this shot, I was aiming somewhere here, just below the white area and to the center. And of course it's a bit to the left, but who cares about it? You can still hit the chest of the enemy soldier from the bench, of course, and from my hand, which is probably better than the average soldier, but it's still a bench and not the tactical accuracy. But before we go on to see some tactical accuracy at 100 meters, let's check the rifle. There were a small number of riflemen and light infantry soldiers that were integrated into the body of the army, but when in wartime it was necessary to set up new units with light capabilities, usually they were created volunteers for that job, who brought their own rifles and accessories mainly, but they could also be equipped with the common rifles available from the 1810s. According to the contemporary tactical doctrines, the light infantrymen, the riflemen, they had to be used as line infantrymen as well. So which means that they had to be able to act just the same as the normal light infantry soldier did. So they must receive the same kind of drill, and on top of that they must be trained to shoot the rifle much better, or they must be trained for light infantry duties better. And this caused several problems, because if you have your soldiers from a militia type irregular unit, well, they are lacking that kind of military discipline that was drilled into the line infantry. So actually there are two different riflemen here. The first one is part of the standing army, who is learning the same kind of drill as the line infantry, but there are huge numbers of voluntary infantrymen who are actually riflemen, or can have a smoothbore musket as well, who are used as light infantry, but they lack the discipline, they lack the drill. But in fact, these troops will never receive that kind of drill, because these volunteer units are usually disbanded after the conflict, or they are disbanded in autumn time, so they go home, so the army does not have to feed them during the winter time, and they reassemble the unit after the winter time passes in springtime, which is really not good for training. And it is very interesting that if you open the drill books of the contemporary army, US Army, they were written by Winfield Scott, excellent manuals by the way. They are based on the French system, the French Napoleonic system, with a little improvement on light infantry tactics. But basically, the light infantry parts of these manuals are just as strict drill books as the line infantry manuals, which means that they don't really care about how the rifleman should be used on the battlefield, how he has to aim, what he has to shoot at, how he has to load the gun. They receive the same kind of drill as the line infantry. There is no or very little distinction between the two kinds of infantry soldiers. So if we want to understand more how these riflemen were trained, because the Scott manuals just will not tell you how the rifleman was trained by that time, we have to search for different documents. If you are looking for a source about how the rifleman was trained in the 1820s, 30s, I have a beautiful source for you. It is a small book. It is titled Handbook for Riflemen. It was written by William Duan and it was published in 1812 in Philadelphia. Now, this tells us how the rifleman was trained by that time. So this little book was published actually the same time when Winfield Scott was already working on his manuals. That was used up until the beginning of the American Civil War, because the 1855 Hardy tactics that incorporated the use of the percussion rifle musket, well, that changed a lot in the tactical system of the Scott manuals. Well, up until that time, this was the sole document that was used for training US soldiers. And the basics of these tactics was moving large bodies of close combat, of soldiers in close combat formations on the battlefield. And it did not really emphasize the advantages of the rifle. But Duan's book is different. He's concentrating on using the rifle, and he was fully confident that the Americans are crackshot. He wrote the following in his book.
The habits of the rifle of the American farmer and the early necessity of self-defense against the rude men of the wilderness and the beasts of the forest gave the rifled gun or grooved carbine a preference over the plain fusil or gun. It was found more certain in its execution than the smooth bore of the fowling piece and firelock by those who were always armed. The habits which grew out of the state of early settlement in a country yet uncultured and uncivilized made every man a good shot.
So Duan was on the side of the rifle, and this is completely understandable, as on the front rear, the accuracy was much more important than the rate of fire, because the settlers probably never ever encountered enemy in close combat formations, but they encountered native fighters with a completely different tactics and utilizing only light tactics. So accuracy, well, that was everything.
But when it came to war against regular armies, problems arose. Being a good shot did not equate to being a formidable soldier. As Duan said, although as marksmen, the American riflemen surpass all others. In what regards discipline and the strength of the confidence arising from discipline, they are inferior to the riflemen of other nations.
So the US Army had a beautiful source for riflemen, and these people knew how to pull the trigger. And probably this is the cause why in the Scots tactics there is no particular part about how to aim with the rifle, how to shoot at longer distances. Probably Scott was pretty sure that the people, the volunteers that are applying for being member of the rifle company, they already know how to fire the gun. Even if Scott's manuals do not share information about how the riflemen should be trained for accuracy, we are lucky because Duan offers us bits and pieces about this training. According to Duan, the riflemen and the light infantrymen had to shoot fast, so with a high rate of fire, and also accurately. When they are acting in close combat formations, the rifleman was also supposed to use cartridges. And when they are acting in loose combat formations, they were to use loose powder and single ball with patch.
Let's see now the 100-meter group shot from the bench for the Mississippi rifle, shot with the original cartridges. To be honest, I was not 100% satisfied with the group. It was better than the musket, but not up to the level I'm used to. The cause here can be two things. First, probably the imperfection of my bore is causing it. But I am not sure, as I have some rifles with imperfect bores and they shoot patched roundball well. The idea for the other reason arose from the strange form of holes on the paper. My feeling was that the patches are not separating from the ball. This is something I had to examine.
I'm pretty sure that the question that kept you awake is whether the patch tied to the round ball, the 525 round ball of Mississippi cartridge, separate after leaving the muzzle. That's the most important question ever. Let's check it. I have a box full of cotton. This can stop the bullet and we can redeem it and we can check whether the patch is still present on the projectile or not. Well, it seems like I hit a weak spot. The bullet exited here, which means I have to repeat the shot. Let's do it again. Much better. Looks like we have it. There is definitely no exit wound. Let's excavate. Now is your question, whether the patch is still on the bullet or not. It separates. And look at that, how tight the fit is. You can see the rifling marks and you can also see the imprint of the material of the patch. So, the system works as it has to. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I was packing back the cotton into the box, I found the patch. And it has plenty of cotton in it, which means that it was following the bullet. It was not following the bullet, it was wrapping the bullet when it impacted the box, which means that it did not detach. So I was wrong. That's why you have to double check everything you do. So according to Buena, the rifleman had to fire volleys at the enemy from close combat formations using paper cartridges and shooting individual single shots to single enemies from loose combat formations. But before teaching these guys accuracy, the first thing to learn was the manual of arms, the musketry drill, just like in the case of the line infantry. So what Buena is actually suggesting is a European style, because in Europe, the light infantry, the Jaegers, the rifles, the hunters, the rifle-armed troops, they were selected from the line infantry. So if you had a crack shot in the line infantry, that was selected later for the light infantry duty. So which means that the light infantry in Europe, it was an allied troop. In the US it was different, because even if Buena suggested to do so, it seldom happened. The rifle regiments were raised from volunteers in the Mexican War as well. So let's suppose that a rifleman knows the drill now. He is accustomed to load and fire his musket on commands. Now comes the target practice. According to Buena, the target practice started at 50 yards and ended at 300 yards. They were using a 5 feet diameter target. This is a large target. It is big enough to show all the arrows that the soldier makes. Besides the static target shooting, Buena also suggesting a way to practice how to load the rifle while running and how to shoot the rifle while running. This is something that he saw from Pennsylvania riflemen.
The target could be a hat or a similarly sized object placed on a fence post. Using the Indian pace, the company moved around the target in a circle, keeping the target on the left side, while constantly firing without stopping the movement.
The Indian pace is a very interesting phenomenon. It is one of those Indian skills that was advisable to learn for the light infantryman. There is no central regulations for an Indian pace. This just means that you are holding your rifle so you can use it anytime, loaded of course, and you're running on rough terrain for hours. So this must have a velocity or speed that can be maintained for hours if necessary to cover large distances. By this time, the normal pace for infantry was 76 per minute, and this could be improved to 90 to 120 per minute, which is a great difference. And this Indian pace, that was integrated in the Scott tactics, which said that the riflemen and the light infantrymen have to move much faster than the normal line of infantry. They must do everything in double quick time, which is 160 paces per minute. Let's talk about the structure of the regiments. According to Scott's tactics, a regiment, a battalion-sized unit, let's say 1,000 men, had 10 companies. There were 8 battalion companies and 2 flank companies. The flank companies could be a light infantry company, a rifle company, or a grenadier company. The grenadier company, if it was present in the system, it was placed on the right flank, while the light infantry or the rifle company was placed on the left flank. These rifle companies, they were special because they could be assembled into rifle units if it was necessary. Each company was divided into 2 platoons, and each platoons were divided into 2 sections. Each battalions could fight in deployed line. They could also fight in attack column or masses. They could form the masses. They could form, of course, skirmish line in front of the close combat formations, and they could also form the square against cavalry. The most important close combat formation of the battalion was the deployed line. It was a 2-rank deep line. The tallest soldiers were on the flanks, but it was the rear rank supposed to have taller soldiers than the front rank, so it was easier for them to load the rifles and to shoot the rifles. Behind the 2 ranks stood the rank closers, the non-commissioned and the commissioned officers. The firepower of the battalion was based on inaccurate smoothbore muskets, so they were firing volleys on the enemy. They could fire by ranks, by 2 ranks, by files, by wing, or by companies as well. The line infantryman was to aim at the large surface of the enemy close combat formation, while the riflemen, they were allowed to pick their individual targets from the enemy line. According to Scott's tactics,
light infantry and rifle companies will be particularly instructed in firing, as in open order, as this will be the mode usually adopted by them in the field. In this fire, the soldier will not be required, as heretofore prescribed, to aim direct to the front, but will be allowed to select his object to the right, left, or front.
The soldiers of the rifle and the light infantry company, they also had to learn how to load and fire their muskets from the kneeling position and from the lying position. So let's see now what happens when the Mississippi rifle is reaching the first units in 1842-43. Nothing. There is no new manual of arms for the Mississippi rifle, while it is a rifle and it is a percussion gun, which means that you completely have to change the method as the rifle is loaded, because it's different compared to the smoothbore flintlock musket. There is no need for priming the pen, which was one of the very first tasks to do for the soldier, but the percussion cap has to be placed on the nipple, which is one of the last things to do. But on the other hand, the cartridge of the Mississippi rifle was ingenious because it incorporated the patched roundball with the powder charge in the paper cartridge, which means that cartridge-wise it did not really need a different kind of loading than in a case of a percussion smoothbore musket. So we have an infantry gun here that is accurate and has a high rate of fire, which is excellent. It is paving the way for the 1855 modification of the tactics and the introduction of the 1855 Springfield rifle musket shooting a conical ball. But let's stop now for a second. Let's shoot this rifle again. Have you ever wondered what is the difference between the modern powders, like the Swiss black powder, which is considered one of the best today, and the old rifle powder that was used in the 19th century by the US Army? Well, today's experiment's goal is to determine what kind of powder charge I need to reach the same kind of muzzle velocity that was measured in the 19th century with this beautiful rifle. The 1850 Ordnance Manual states that the initial velocity of the bullet fired from this rifle was 1,750 feet per secondum. This is what I would like to reach. Let's see how can I do it with modern powders. So that's the first cartridge, 75 grains of 3F Swiss powder, and the muzzle velocity to reach is 1,750 feet per sec, which corresponds to 525 meters per sec. Let's check the first cartridge. 462. So it's 60 meters per second low. Let's give the next cartridge 85 grains. $4.95. Let's give it 90. $5.03. Let's try 95. 95 grains of Swiss real. $5.22. So to achieve the, let's say, 525 meters per second, equaling around 1,750 feet per sec, we needed 95 grains of 3F Swiss powder instead of the original rifle powder load, which was 75 grains in the original cartridge, which means that the original rifle powder was much hotter than the Swiss number 3. Interesting. And now we have all the information that we need for a ballistics reconstruction. Let's see the trajectory of this rifle.
If the 218 grain 525 roundball's initial velocity is 522 meters per second, then its muzzle energy is 1925 joules. The kinetic energy drops under 100 joules at around 625 meters, meaning that probably this can be the largest distance to cause a wound to an enemy soldier. The BC of this 525 round ball is 0.079, not an ideal for accurate long-range shooting, as the resistance of the air is strong in this case. The flight path of the bullet is nearly the same as in case of the projectile of the musket, examined in my previous video. When aiming to 300 paces, the outer edge of the contemporary musketry, the peak of the trajectory is around 65 cm at 120 meters. So all in all, the projectile covers the plus-minus 50 cm vital zone I set for hitting a human torso for a serious wound.
So the Mississippi rifle contributed a lot to developing tactics, but it also contributed a lot to developing the infantry gear of the US Army. Let's go briefly through the history of the US rifle gear. Back in the time of the Revolutionary Wars, the most basic gear was carried by the rifleman, the volunteer rifleman, which was a hunting pouch and a flask and his knife. So technically he carried everything that he normally used for hunting. It was his own gear. It was not regularized. The regularization of the gear started in the late 1830s. And in 1839, patterns were sent out to the state-owned arsenals and also to the contractors to produce a rifle pouch like this. This is the pattern 1839 model. It is the repro of the pattern 1839 model. Of course, this is something that I made. If you are interested in how I made this and what kind of pattern I used, then please visit my Patreon page, because next week you will find a complete video about how I made this little leather pouch. So the gear is made from three parts. We have a sling here that is holding both the flask and both the pouch. The flask and the pouch is attached by brass hooks. And also we have a flask here. This is the so-called peace flask. This is a reproduction by Pedersoli. This should have an adjustable valve that is dropping a charge between 85 and 100 grains of powder. And we have a pouch here with two pockets that can hold your cartridges, your patches, and your ball, and some minor accessories for your rifle.
According to the ordnance manual, the pouch was made from light upper shoe leather, 7-inch wide at the bottom, 6.6 at the top, 5.5 inches deep, made with gussets at the sides and bottom. Partition made from buff leather. The flap, 2.7 inches deep, with a strap and a leather button on the front side. Two loops, Japan iron, 0.9 inch wide and 0.7 inch long for the belt rings.
So we can see that there is no infantry cartridge box in the system, and in fact these pouches remained in service up until the 50s, because we can also find them in the 1850 edition of the second edition of the ordnance manual, with a little difference, because the size of the pouch is the same, but the flask is different, because the spout on the flask, it should be an adjustable spout, something like this. You can adjust the volume of the powder by turning the top of the spout.
With the introduction of the new percussion rifle cartridge, the powder charge was reduced to 75 grains because it was not necessary anymore to prime the pen. So the valve of the flask had to be replaced to be able to drop 75 grains as well. So the new adjustable valve was able to drop 75 to 100 grains of powder.
But if you open that second edition, the 1850 edition, we will find that there's another infantry gear, a rifleman gear, that is described there, which is consisting of a belt, which is 1/2 inch wider than the normal infantry belt. This was necessary because there are heavy stuff on it, like a cartridge box. This is a very close relative to the normal infantry cartridge box, but it's a bit smaller because of the 54 caliber instead of the 69 caliber musket cartridges. This had two tin liners inside. The upper compartment held 10 loose cartridges, while the below compartments held one bundle of 10 cartridges and 12 caps, which means that the soldier had 40 cartridges. It also held a percussion cap pouch with 3 inch wide and 3 inch height and a thickness of 1.5 inch. And it also held a large bovie. Of course, this is a modern bovie. This is my hunting knife. They use different kind of bovies. I will talk about that later. Let's do some offhand fun to the infantry line target. Ha.
100-meter distance and a flintlock musket with the authentic cartridges.
Let's check it. Well, I have all the 3 shots, 2 in the target, 1 in a soldier, and 2 misses. 1 is here. 1 is here, 1 is here, and 1 is here. This is a light wound, so out of 3 shots I was able to cause a light wound. Well, that is not too much, not too much. I was aiming in the dead center of this body, quite somewhere here, which means that that it is very, very difficult to manage the flintlock because of the slow ignition. So it is not just the bench rest accuracy that matters, but the tactical accuracy when the soldier is actually holding the musket.
Let's do the offhand 100 meters with the Mississippi rifle as well.
That's it. And the rifle is of course much more accurate. 1, 2, 3 shots in the center body. I was aiming somewhere here. Of course, I don't know exactly where because there is not a black area here that I can precisely aim at. But anyway, it was good. It was okay for taking out this guy at 100 meters from the game. Let's give it some back shots.
So now we know that in the 1850s there were 2 options for a rifleman armed with a Mississippi rifle. He could carry the 1839 pouch with the flask, or he could carry this, let's say, 1850 model rifleman gear with the percussion cap pouch and with the cartridge box. When I was writing a title for Osprey, the title of that book is Early Military Rifles. Well, it is telling the story of the early military rifles and their units and their tactics, of course. We decided to make a plate about the engagement at Buena Vista. This is a very famous battle fought on the 22-23rd of February 1847. Probably the most iconic moment of this battle was when the Mississippi Rifles led by Jefferson Davis fired the last volley, stopped the charge of the Mexicans, dropped their rifles lacking a bayonet, and drew their knives for charging the broken enemy.
So it was a tough question to decide whether the 1839 or the 1850 gear should I display. Why? The 1850 gear could not exist before 1850 because that's why we call it 1850. It sounds natural, it sounds very simple. But this is not true because we have a primary source about these soldiers. In fact, we have a painting, a watercolor painting, which is telling different information and tells us to use this gear. So these images were created by Samuel Chamberlain. He was a member of the 1st US Dragoon Regiment, and he also wrote a diary. That's an excellent source about the Mexican War. And I already used it when I was filming the whole rifle, where you can find some delicate parts when he was using the breech of the whole rifle as a pistol. And Chamberlain was very kind with us because he displayed the exact moment when the Mississippi rifles are firing their volleys on the Mexicans. And this image clearly shows that these guys have wide waist belts and they have cartridge boxes, which means that in 1847 they already carried that gear that was later described in the 1850 manual. So it can happen that the Mississippi rifle is responsible for adopting this kind of new gear that was later used in the American Civil War as well. It is also a good question why they carried the Bowie knife, why it was part of the rifleman accessory kit. Well, the first reason is because the Mississippi rifle originally did not have a bayonet lug. Later, they were modified to have a bayonet lug, but by the time of the Mexican War, they did not have a bayonet, which means that the rifleman had to carry something for self-defense and for attacking sometimes. Even in the American Civil War, we know about occasions when Bowie knives were used in the charges. Actually, we have quite a few information about what kind of knives they could carry. We have 5 options here. The first option is they could carry their civilian large fighting or hunting knives to the battle, which is obvious. The second option was the so-called butcher knife. The butcher knives were centrally issued to the troops. They had 8 to 10 inch length blades. The width of the blade could be 1 to 1.5 inch. It was plain, flat, thin, and single-edged. The third option was the model 1849 Rifleman knife. Now, these knives, or these bowies, were manufactured by a company called Ames Manufacturing Corporation in Cabottsville, Massachusetts. This company was established in 1774, and the family contributed a lot to the developing Chicopee into an industrialized center. Now, these were massive pieces with an 18-inch spear point blade, so that was big. That was a big and heavy knife. The fourth option was the Rifleman knife by A.J. Hicks from Cleveland. These were delivered to the army from 1856, and they had also a really big blade with 14.5 inch length. So this was massive as well. The fifth option is the Collins fighting knife. This knife was made by the Collins brothers in Hartford, Connecticut. This company was founded in 1826, and it is famous for making the pikes that were used in the John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry.
And this is, ladies and gentlemen, the last firing session of the series. Now we are going to shoot the musket with buck and ball cartridges to 100 meters distance.
Let's check it. And this is the back and ball cartridge, ladies and gentlemen. We have two lethal ones here. These are two 65 caliber balls penetrating this guy. He's quite unfortunate. And we have two backshot hits also. Altogether we had 9 backshots, and out of the 9 backshots we have 1 and 2 that hit the target. Actually, one caused a wound here. This could be a lethal wound. This could be a lethal one for sure, and this just missed the target here. Probably this guy is a bit too thin, so probably this could be in his body as well. So, which means that the back and ball cartridge is still an effective cartridge at 100 meters as well. But I would already go for the rifle. There is one more backshot hit here, so probably that would hit the guy left to this one, but that's not in the target. But it was fun. So ladies and gentlemen, we reached the end of the Mississippi series, and I'm pretty sure that we learned a lot about the history and the impact of the Mississippi rifle. In my opinion, the Mississippi rifle is a game changer because it changed the way the guns were made in the state-owned arsenals and in the private contractor system. It also contributed a lot to the modernization of the tactics and the rifles in 1855. And now we are at the gates of the American Civil War, so probably next time we are going to talk about the Springfield rifle musket. So please don't forget to subscribe. If you like what I do, then please share, comment, like, because this will help the channel to grow, because the search engine will not help us because of the firearms content. So I need your help in this. If you wish to support us, you can do it through patreon.com/capandball. Here you will find exclusive content from me. We are also present on the History of Weapons and War platform. That's an excellent hiding place for gun nuts like us, with educational channels and thousands of videos for you. I think you will like it. So please, if you can, support us there as well. So ladies and gentlemen, up until next time, stay cool and keep your powder dry.